Sean Yoes is live from West Baltimore, episode 1, with the president of the University of Baltimore, Kurt L. Schmoke, former mayor of Baltimore. President Schmoke, Mayor Schmoke.
Guy can't keep a job, can he, Sean?
Welcome to Live from West Baltimore, and thank you for agreeing to be my first guest.
No, it's a real honor. I appreciate it. I've admired your work as a journalist over the years. You've been real insightful, and I think brought a lot of attention to important problems in the city. I know in particular one of my good friends, Nathaniel McFadden, when he was a state senator, would quote you quite often. He was
That's funny.
absolute believer. But I'm honored that to participate in the program.
Well, I appreciate that, and Senator McFadden was always very gracious to me over the years. I want to get a couple of things out of the way even before we get into the body of the conversation. I never interviewed you when I was a journalist.
Well, that's because you were a young man and I was an old guy.
No. And literally the other day I was thinking about it. I was like, wow, how come I never interviewed Kurt Schmoke? And what it was when you came into office, you came in 87.
Mm-hmm.
So in 87, I hadn't gotten into journalism yet. And then in 88, when you testified before the Congress, I was on my way back from L.A. to Baltimore.
I see.
And when I came to the Afro in 89, they immediately made me an education reporter.
Mm-hmm.
So I never touched City Hall.
Right.
And so I went back and forth from L.A. to Baltimore from 88 to 93. I went to Detroit in 94, and I started working in TV news. And then when I got back to the Afro, it was 99, and I got back in time for O'Malley to be inaugurated. So
right.
I missed the Schmoke years.
Well, I know that I left City Hall December 7, 1999. That's Pearl Harbor Day. But for my wife, she says for some people that may be a day that lives in infamy, but not for her. That was somewhat of a family liberation day.
I could imagine. Yeah. And I want to get into all of that, down the line during this conversation. But first, I want to talk about football, little football.
Okay.
But I want to talk about you.
A legend in his own mind.
No. You're not a legend in your own mind. I think that what you did as a football player, I know you are famously modest and humble, but. Let's go back to Thanksgiving Day 1965.
I wish I could.
But you were the star quarterback of City College, the Black Knights.
Right.
The school didn't integrate until 1954. 10 black students entered the school in 1954. So I'm guessing, I could be wrong, but were you the first black quarterback of the team?
I was the first black quarterback.
I figured as much.
That's
I wasn't
right.
sure, but I figured as much. But you led that team to back-to-back undefeated seasons and back-to-back MSA 8 conference championships. Now, I know you're a humble guy, but
Sean, now you got to understand. This was at the time that the high school was on shifts, and we had at Baltimore City College High School 4,000 all boys in that high school.
Yeah.
800 guys came out for football.
800?
800 guys tried out for the football team.
Good
so
grief.
you can imagine, and the coach, George Young, who went on later, great fame as the general manager of the New York Giants.
Offensive line coach for the Colts.
Yeah,
also.
and he was just an outstanding teacher. He was a history teacher and a coach, but he had 800 guys to choose from. So I get selected as quarterback, not on talent necessarily, but mostly on IQ. It was to make sure that the guy could understand the plays and things of that nature. But I enjoyed it. And I had some wonderful players, as you know. Kurt Anderson,
right,
who's a state delegate, was a leader on that team. He was the captain, in fact, my senior year. and we had just a huge line. So, I did my best to manage that.
You didn't do
process,
anything. It was just the line and everybody else. But it wasn't.
But I enjoyed it. It was wonderful. It was a time of real unity, I think, because a lot of people cared about high school sports, and the local press focused on it.
Right.
So it was something that helped to bring people together in Baltimore at a time, as you mentioned, they were still going through a transition because after the Brown versus Board of Education decision, Baltimore announced immediately that they were going to integrate the schools. That was in 1955. But it was a very slow process.
Right.
And unfortunately, by the time I got to high school, the school system was starting to resegregate. When I started Baltimore City College high school in 1964, it was 70% white, 30% black. My senior year, it was 70% black, 30% white.
Wow.
So you could start to see
happened very quickly.
These things, right? A lot of issues in Baltimore that just symbolized some of the lingering problems of segregation in our city.
Yeah. I want to go back to that game, though, on Thanksgiving Day in 1965. 25,000 fans at Old Memorial Stadium.
That's right. Yeah.
25,000. Some Colts games may not have gotten 25,000 fans at time.
Yeah, it was. It was a big deal at the time because it was Thanksgiving Day, and there had been a tradition for over 50 years of the Catholic schools playing in the morning. Calvert Hall played Loyola in the morning, and in the afternoon, City College played Polytechnic Institute. And I do recall Mr. Young as our coach, his locker room speech was that for most of us, this was going to be the largest crowd that we ever performed before.
Yeah.
Said some of you guys, this will be your last football game. For others, you may go on to other things, but it is unlikely that you would appear in front of such a big crowd. So it kind of got everybody pumped up.
Well,
they did a good job that day.
A good job? You whipped Poly 52-6.
That's right. That was
to this date the most lopsided victory in the Poly City series.
Well, we, as I said, it was a team effort, and these guys there was no quit in them.
Yeah, okay. How did you do that day? What did you do?
Well, I tried my best to identify the best players, and but Sean, the only reason why I'm a bit hesitant is that there is one issue that if you talk to Kurt Anderson at all, that still bothered me. There was a fullback on the team, Ken Dotson, who needed a certain number of yards to break the running back record, and I didn't think about it the whole game. And so I would believe in the last quarter, when Mr. Young took us all out, we're standing on the sideline, and Ken happened to say something about he was so pleased that things went well, and it was another person that said to Ken, "Oh, and you're short of the record." So I wanted to go back in to help Ken, and Mr. Young said, "No, you don't do that. You don't play the game for those reasons." But I always felt bad. Now Kurt tells me, and I haven't watched the films, he claims that I gave the ball to the guy at some point during the game. I don't remember that, but that's the one thing, more than the victory, that always bothered me over the years. I wish I could have done, and Ken, unfortunately, is no longer with us.
But it must have been super exciting for a young guy.
It was satisfying. It was exciting for us. It was great for the school. It was really wonderful for the city to see these teams and all the fans, come together that way. Unfortunately, now it's kind of a shell of itself because a decision was made to end the Maryland Scholastic Association to become a part of the state system, because the coaches and others wanted to be a part of state championship series. So the MSA no longer exists, Maryland Scholastic Association, and the City Poly game has gone, it no longer is on Thanksgiving and no longer at Memorial Stadium.
Right. Well, it wasn't your last football game. Maybe a lot of your teammates, it may have been your last one, but you were the quarterback, again, of the freshman team at Yale.
Right.
And, again, you participated in another historical game in 1968.
Yeah, unfortunately, I did.
Why you say unfortunately, right?
Well, you're talking about the 29-29.
The 29-29
yeah, right.
tied. Both teams were undefeated, 8-0, Harvard
right.
and Yale. And ESPN ranked that game as the 9th greatest tie college game in the history of college football in 2010. So, you made history as a quarterback of a football team.
Well, unfortunately, that's one that, as you probably know, it was a bizarre game that Yale was actually leading by 16 points with a minute left to go, and we managed to end up with a tie. So the next day, the newspaper at Harvard University said, Harvard beats Yale 29-29.
I saw that.
Yeah, but if ESPN loves it, who am I to say that it shouldn't be ranked up there?
What was that? What was the experience like quarterbacking at Yale? I mean,
well, I did that one season. In that particular game, I played defensive back and got injured. And so following that, I did not participate in intercollegiate football. The thing that about my college experience is that I went to Yale thinking that I would play football, but there were just so many other opportunities to pursue things at the university. As you probably know, I ended up in my junior year starting a child care center, which my good friend Calvin Hill allowed me to use his name in order to raise funds and also to let people in the New Haven community know that this was going to be a child care center, not just for Yale, but for those who worked in New Haven. And so I started that along with a good friend of mine at Yale, and it's still in existence. In the 51st year of existence is the Calvin Hill Daycare Center in New Haven.
Yeah, I want to get to that in a minute, but I want to just go a little bit further with football. I because I'm a football guy. I mean, and I'm a history guy. I think about the politicians who played, and I think about Jack Kemp, who played at Occidental College and then went on to become a star football player in the AFL mostly for the Buffalo Bills. Was there never in the back of your mind somewhere, back of your mind, front of your mind, the thought that did you ever even think about pro football?
Oh, Sean, let me tell you. You mentioned earlier George Young, who was the coach of our team. Right. After that 52-6 victory, we go to the next season, and before the season begins, I'm out on the field warming up with just before practice. Mr. Young comes over to me. He says, "Kurt, what are you going to do after high school?" I said, "Coach, I'm thinking about going to big school." He said, "What are you thinking about?" I said, "Well, I think about applying to Notre Dame or maybe Ohio State or Penn State." And Mr. Young, who's about 300 pounds at that time, comes over to me, puts his arm around me and says, "Well, I just want to tell you one thing." I said, "What's that, Coach?" He said, "You're not that good."
Oh, man.
I could have been crushed and everything. He said, "Look," and he held on to me and he said, "Look," and he pointed to some of the guys and he named individuals. He said, "Those guys are going to go on. Football is going to become more and more important in their life after they leave high school. For you, it's going to become less and less important. So let me give you another set of schools to think about. You can compete there, but it's going to open your eyes to other aspects of life. And so he listed a couple of Ivies. His favorite school in the Ivy League was Dartmouth. The next favorite school was Amherst that he was interested in. But no, if I had in the back of my mind any lingering notion that I could play at the highest level, Mr. Young disabused me of that notion.
That's
in a
crazy.
very creative way.
But he had a little prophecy on him.
He was as I said, he was a good teacher too. He was a history teacher and just an outstanding man, and we all benefited from having him in our lives for the short time we did.
So instead of Ohio State and moving on to trying to star in the old AFL, you did go to Yale.
Yep.
And you went there at a very volatile time in this country's history. You're there in 1968, 60. You came in 67.
Came in 1967. That's right.
And by 1969, all hell was breaking loose around the country and even in New Haven.
Yeah, the Vietnam War was raging, civil rights activity. Dr. King was killed in '68, and followed by Robert Kennedy. And then for us, the big issue occurred in May of 1970 when Bobby Seale of the Black Panther Party was on trial in New Haven, and a huge protest occurred, and it actually shut the university down for a while. And so we had to react to that. A number of students, as well as administrators, had to figure out how to keep things kind of under control, and yet allow the protesters to demonstrate, because even our president of the university felt that there was some injustice there, and he expressed his skepticism about the ability of a black revolutionary to get a fair trial, which was viewed as highly controversial for an establishment figure like President Kingman Brewster to say.
So, at that time, you were secretary of the class in 1971.
Correct.
And you were one of the leaders of the Black Student Alliance at Yale as well. Mm-hmm. And the faculty, in the midst of this extremely volatile time, they spoke to you as the student representative.
Yeah. It ended up that they had this rule that students were not supposed to speak at faculty meetings at the I guess it was the full faculty meeting. That had been the tradition at Yale. But the provost of the university, second in control, thought that they needed to hear from a student, and I was selected. Yeah. And so in order to keep the tradition, they temporarily suspended the rules and met as a committee of the whole. So that nobody moved from the room, but they said, we are now sitting as a committee of the whole. And I spoke to the faculty about student concerns, asked for them to demonstrate some leadership. And apparently what I said was well received, and we went on the next a few days of basically keeping things under control. One minor incident, but other than that, we kept it under control. And those demonstrators came and left without the destruction, and without what happened at Kent State, as you know, a death there, or at Jackson State, where there was death. So even though we had National Guard out there, we were able to keep things calm.
But you point to that, and that was a real possibility. That's not contrived. There was the possibility of violence and a riot was imminent.
Oh, absolutely, and everybody was on edge. And as I said, the incidents that occurred in some other colleges, where you had these young National Guard guys, and they felt under siege, and incidents occurred, mistakes were made, deaths occurred at those colleges. The only thing that we had in New Haven, we had some tear gas canisters thrown one evening in what we called the old campus where freshmen were. That got cleared up, but no bodily harm, no injuries to anybody, and clearly no deaths. So, the good communication and allowing, making adjustments to allow students to show some leadership, to express their views, and I think to encourage the faculty to demonstrate their own leadership, I thought was important.
Well, you said, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but you said the students on this campus are confused, they're frightened. We want guidance from you, moral leadership. On behalf of my fellow students, I beg you to give it to us.
Right. Yeah. Prior to that sentence, of what I had said was that we had not been receiving that kind of leadership from elected officials. That people weren't standing up, weren't saying how they really felt and believed, and giving real moral guidance. And I said, you're the people who are here at the institution before we got here. You'll be here after us. Right. I mean, you're the real institutional leaders. Let's show some guidance.
How old were you? Were you 19?
70, yeah.
No, 60. That was 1970, right?
1970. So I was 20.
Oh, so you're 20 years old, and you're telling these old guys.
I didn't think about it in that way, Sean.
You're telling these old guys, tighten up.
That's right.
But that, I mean, I understand your thoughts for you.
Yeah.
But you those words and your presence there may have helped avert disaster.
Well, in hindsight, I know that there'd been a number of articles written about that.
Judas and the Black Messiah, the Alex Rackley case was highlighted in that movie.
That's right. That's right. And yeah, it was a powder keg, and but people did react as a community. I mean, and that was the whole key in trying to get folks to work together. I mean, the one thing that is often not noted is when I gave that brief speech in it was called Sprague Hall. Outside, there were like 2,000 students standing outside, wow, chanting and things like. So the faculty really, they were confused. They weren't sure exactly which way to go, and I think some of them. I know for a fact that a couple of faculty members thought I was going to come in and give this, power to the people speech, right, and start ranting and raving, I guess both the tone and the substance, and the fact that it was brief. I didn't speak very long. Just was reassuring,
right,
and people decided, let's work together with the students and the administration instead of fighting one another. And it led to, peace at Yale and in the community.
Right. So you went on from Yale, obviously, and your degree was in history. You went on to be a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford, right, and graduated Harvard Law in 1976. And I want to jump up a little bit before we get to your work as your political career in Baltimore, but I want to jump up to September 30th, 1988. You're 38 years old. You've been mayor of Baltimore a little less than a year, and you're testifying before the House Select Committee on Narcotics, and you regarding the impact and the efficacy of the so-called war on drugs.
Right.
And this is so we had one war on drugs with Nixon. We had one war on drugs with Reagan, and then a third war on drugs with Bush. So the country clearly was in a war footing.
Absolutely.
When it came to dealing with the issue of drug use, abuse, drug culture in the United States. Everybody was saying, we got to go to war.
Right.
We got to fight. We got to get tough. We got to lock people up.
Right.
And you testify before the Congress and say, we got to do something different.
Yep, that's right.
You advocated for the decriminalization of narcotics. Kwesi Mfume testified against you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure. Did Elijah testify against you?
No.
Okay.
No,
I know he was in the House of Delegates, but I'd heard on the periphery that may have happened. But I knew Mfume testified against you. Royden Dyson testified against you. Ben Cardin testified against you. So the delegation from Baltimore testified against you, the mayor of Baltimore at the time.
Right.
Take us through the decision-making process of you coming up with that fateful decision to testify for decriminalization in 1988.
Right.
Take us through that.
Well, I'll give you the short version.
Okay. I'm sure you thought about it for a while.
Yeah. Well, as you know, I had been the state's attorney.
Of course.
So I was the chief prosecutor, and in I guess it was in 1986 that a friend of mine who was a police officer working undercover was shot and killed. Marty Ward. And I started thinking at that time, because I had to listen to Marty die. He was wearing a body wire. Right. And so it was recorded, his last moments with this guy. And it was clear to me that there were more people who were really hooked on drug money than hooked on drugs.
Wow.
And that part of what the strategy had to be to take the profit out of distributing drugs. And the way in which we were going at it was sort of like the alcohol prohibition of the 1920s. You make it illegal, somebody else is going to create an underground, inflate the profits, make huge amounts of money, create whole criminal underground. And so it's more and more, I started to think about the war on drugs similar to the war on alcohol in the 1920s. And so I became mayor, not really talking about that issue. There were other issues that were primary in that, my first election. But I had the opportunity to speak to the U.S. Conference it was a joint meeting of the U.S. Conference of Mayors and the National Association of Police Chiefs. And I read my speech that my speechwriter had put together, and then I looked at a book that was a former chaplain at Yale, William Sloane Coffin, and the book was called Once to Every Man, and it's based on the hymn of the church, Once to Every Man comes a moment to decide. And I read that, and I said, this is the time that I make the decision. Am I going to tell them what I really think about this, or do I hedge my bets and play the politically safe route of, we need more treatment, we need more police, we need more guns on the street? And I decided, no, this is the time I'm going to tell what I really think on this war on drugs. So I gave the speech there to the Conference of Mayors and the police chiefs.
What year was that?
It was in late 80s. It was about a couple of months before.
So it was just before your testimony.
It was before the
Congress.
testimony in Congress.
Right.
So although I used the term decriminalization, the Associated Press, by the time I got back from that speech, it said Baltimore Mayor proposes legalizing drugs. So that was the tag that I got.
Right.
So then Congressman Rangel then is having these hearings, and I think that the reason that they invited me was to basically put the kibosh on this idea, to show what a bad thing it was, what a bad guy I was, but I repeated my views to the Congress that we had to go in a different direction, that the war on drugs, I said, should be a public health war, not a criminal justice war. It ought to be led by the Surgeon General, not the Attorney General. And but it was at a time when everybody believed that we could arrest and prosecute our way out of this, and incarcerate our way out of the problem. And so my views at the time were viewed as more heresy than good policy. That was it. I made that decision. Started because of my views changed with the death of Marty Ward
in '86.
Yeah.
You mentioned that people were not just hooked on drugs, but hooked on drug money. But I would say that, and I think the evidence would support, that it wasn't just the criminals that were hooked on drug money.
Oh, absolutely. You had a whole established infrastructure fighting the war on drugs that really fought against any idea. I mean, if we had gone to a public health approach completely, the DEA would not have been justified in their current structure. The prisons, the whole private prison industry would have collapsed if we had gone the public health approach back then. Mass incarceration, we'd talk about that as a theoretical concept, as opposed to something that immediately impacted our lives over the last few years. So there are a lot of direct impact consequences that would have occurred had we embraced the idea of treating this as a health problem, not as a crime problem.
And I'm going to come back and drill down on that a little bit. But before I even get there were people, and again, I defer to your humility, but there were people that believed you could have been the first black president of the United States.
Well, I don't know about that.
Let me speak a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd gone from this kind of mythic image as a kid, quarterbacking City College, to Yale, to helping quash what could have been a catastrophe at Yale, Harvard Law. You went to this prestigious firm in Baltimore. Out of law school, you become the state's attorney for Baltimore City. You're the first elected black mayor of Baltimore, Rhodes Scholar, impeccable credentials, and as our mutual mentor Larry Gibson says, not a whiff of scandal. There were people that I used to be, when I was a producer at Channel 2, Rudy Miller was one of my anchors. And Rudy said to me one day, she said, "Kurt Schmoke shouldn't be mayor, he should be senator, Kurt. He should be a senator." And I knew what she was saying.
Right.
And the point of the matter is that the reality is this: whether or not you accept or others accept the fact that there were people that believed that you could have been the first president of the United States, you certainly were on an ascendant path politically when you made the decision in 1988 to punch the whole establishment in the face.
Right. Well, yeah, I never thought, in fact, I didn't believe there was going to be a black president in my lifetime until 11 p.m. on the night that Obama got elected. When Pennsylvania went for Obama, I said, okay, now it's right. But yeah, I had thought that, I had hoped to be a U.S. senator. That was my dream political job. But when I made that the speech to the Conference of Mayors, and then my congressional testimony. I told my wife that this is it in terms of any ascending, going further in politics. I did feel that I could stay as mayor for a couple of terms because I felt that people knew me, that, having been the state's attorney, that they knew I wasn't just kind of being irresponsible about drugs, that, I had street cred as a prosecutor, at least. But it was very clear to me that I was making a choice to end any kind of ascendancy in politics.
So you, after that address to the House, you knew that it was basically that was going to be it.
That was it, yeah. Because running for Congress, for example, you run every 2 years, and it would be so easy to demagogue that issue that people wouldn't really understand. Whereas as mayor, I made that speech in 1988. I didn't have to face the electorate again until 91. Right. So I had 3 years to talk to people, to explain exactly what, I was, what I meant by my statements. And so in my first reelection, when my two opponents, Dew Burns and Bill Swisher, kept saying, get rid of them because of the drug issue, the community reaction by all the polls was that the community still disagreed with me, but they supported the fact that I didn't change my opinion. They gave me kind of respect for sticking with my views, even though the overwhelming majority by 1991 still didn't accept the notion of decriminalization. By the time I left office, however, people were starting to come around and say, I think I understand what he's talking about now. It's not like he's pro-drugs, but he wants to figure out a different way of addressing. And some of that change came about because of AIDS. That people, they started connecting this issue, substance abusers using dirty needles and sharing it with others. And as you know, we came up at the first city with a needle exchange, a clean needle program. And that didn't increase crime. It didn't increase addiction. So people started saying, oh, wait a minute, maybe there are other strategies that could deal with this. And so it's still an uphill battle. But for me, that was end of elected politics.
More than 30 years later, after you made that decision, and we've all witnessed the carnage.
Absolutely.
That is in the aftermath of all these years, the thousands of mostly black men and tens of thousands that were locked up in just Baltimore City.
Yeah.
All the deaths, all the damage. What do you think about if we had just began the conversation? Was there something inside of your head that believed that if you started this, that maybe we would have at least began the conversation at that point, or? Well,
I think you're right. You hit the nail on the head about beginning the conversation. That's what I had hoped would occur, but that it would move faster. I used to go to, because I got invited to a lot of places. People wanted to know, they were skeptical, and a lot of places that were very hostile to me. But I would go to it, and I'd start by saying, look, before I give you my position on this, let me just ask you 3 questions. First, do you think we've won the war on drugs? Second, do you think we're winning the war on drugs? Third, do you think that doing more of the same for the next 10 years will win the war on drugs? I said, if you can't answer yes to those questions, would you be open to considering alternatives? And that's how I started the conversation with skeptical audiences. And so people would say, no, we're not. We haven't won. No, we're not winning. Doing more of the same? No, that's not going to get it. So then I would say, all right, let's talk about alternatives. But that was church by church, Rotary Club by Rotary Club.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah, it was. This is, and you remember now. My last election was 1995. That was before internet was, social media was huge in campaigns and things like that. So I'm doing this, trying to make my case small group by small group, whereas the national megaphone from the president, from the senators and everything was saying they had just passed the 1994 Criminal Justice Act that, started this mass incarceration. So the crime bill, the national political class was going one direction. I'm going in another, very slowly. But of course, what really changed was opioid epidemic.
Well,
that changed the way people started thinking about the war on drugs.
And I think, kind of implicit in what you're saying is that the abusers of drugs became white.
All of a sudden, with the opioid, it was no longer those people.
Right.
It was no longer viewed as just an inner city problem. And I heard elected official after elected official talking about suburban housewives who were on drugs, and how could you lock them up? I mean, they're good people. They just have a problem. It's called addiction. Yeah. It's a health problem. Yeah, and that's the opioid epidemic started changing the national conversation about drugs.
What is that type of hypocrisy? What do you think? I mean, how after all that you had gone through over these years and trying to make your case, that must have been really a trip to see.
To
coin a phrase.
I guess the issue is that this was not only a social policy but a political issue, and if you're dealing with politics.
And race.
You got to make change when you can. And so as you see, there are more states now that have either decriminalized or legalized certain types of marijuana, which in 1988 was viewed as the craziest idea in the world. But all of it has come about, all the change has mainly come about by this opioid situation, with people now viewing, quote, substance abuse as more of a health problem than a crime problem.
As you see what's happening now, and specifically in Baltimore City, and what State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby is doing as far as not prosecuting certain crimes, and other places, as you alluded to, other places around the country beginning to finally embrace your approach. How do you think it's going? I mean, what are your thoughts on where we are right now in 2021?
I think if you look at a combination of Mayor Scott's neighborhood crime approach, or comprehensive crime approach, and the State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby, and Commissioner Harrison, you look at those plans, I'd say they're on the right direction. Today, as we're talking, the problem is that there's still a lack of coordination. They got to combine it, make sure that those approaches are coordinated, because I talk to police officers who still not sure what they can arrest, what they can't arrest, how they intervene, how they can't intervene. The community wants to know what they can call the police about, what they can't. So I think the strategy, the plans are the right ones for this time, and I just hope that a lot more work is done on coordinating their efforts.
Yeah. So let's go back to the beginning of your political career. The first time I met you, I was in junior high school, and it was in Ashburton, and there was a barbecue, and I don't remember whose house it was. But my dad had me at a friend at this house, and this young guy, Kurt Schmoke, comes in and has a couple of people with him, and he's running for state's attorney for Baltimore City. And we shook hands, and It's like, oh, okay. What? And ironically, that kind of brings us to the connective tissue between us, and that's Larry Gibson,
Right.
who is been my mentor since I met him in 2004. You're not that. He's 79. You're 71.
Right.
Do you call him a mentor, or what do you call him? He's just. What do you think of? What do you think?
Well,
of?
Yeah, that's interesting because I had my first encounter with Larry.
Encounter.
That's how we met. It was an encounter. As a young lawyer, he was in his late 20s and got appointed to the Baltimore City School Board.
Right. That's right.
And I was the student government president at City College. And the school board was about to make a decision that I thought was completely,
I remember this story.
completely erroneous. And they were going to make City a comprehensive neighborhood school rather than a special college prep high school.
Right.
And so my first meeting of Larry Gibson was when I testified in front of the school board and told him he was wrong. He, of course, had the upper hand because he had the votes.
Of course.
And he was a City College guy. I mean, he was a City College graduate, before me, but someone who cared greatly about the school and about the whole public school system. But I thought he was wrong. But in any event, he appreciated what I had to say, even though he disagreed with it. So later on, he makes a decision in his life to become a law school professor and a behind-the-scenes political strategist for a number of folks. And I contacted him about going to law school. That was he was at the University of Virginia at the time. He took a year to be at the University of Virginia Law School. And I was trying to decide on where to go to law school, and I contacted Professor Gibson. He gave me his views. And then later on, we had a connection because Larry loves to travel.
Right.
And my mother and stepfather were assigned to Liberia as he was bishop of the AME Church. And so I connected the two of them. So Professor Gibson and his wife stayed with my family in Liberia for a while. And so we had kind of a distant connection. But when I started thinking about running for state's attorney in 1982, he's the guy to call.
Right.
He had a track record of having elected judges, having been responsible for the Perrin-Mitchell
trailblazing,
election.
groundbreaking campaigns.
Outstanding, and he knew the politics of the city better than just about anybody that I knew. And of course, he may have told you this, but I go to see him, tell him that I had been an assistant U.S. attorney, so I had credentials as a prosecutor. Said I'm interested in running for state's attorney, and his first question to me, "Are you prepared to lose?" So I figure that here's a repeat from my high school where the guy tells me that I'm not that good.
Else. Right, do something else.
So what is it? Something in the blood there at Baltimore City College? But anyway, yeah, he asked me if I was prepared to lose.
He didn't think it was a good idea.
He didn't. And the reason that I thought the timing was right, even though I was running against an incumbent,
Bill Swisher.
Bill Swisher,
fairly popular at the time.
But it was the first election season after Jesse Jackson's run for president. So Reverend Jackson had inspired a lot of people around the country to get registered, to get more interested in elective office. And I thought that the Baltimore electorate was ready for a change, and Professor Gibson was somewhat skeptical of it until he did some polling. He loves to do polling.
Yes.
And thought the sentiment was right, that people were interested in change. He still wasn't sure that I was the right candidate. Remember, because I was 32, and I hadn't been in state policy. I had been a federal prosecutor, and I looked 32.
Well, you may have looked 22.
So he came up with these posters to make me look old. He made me frown when I took the picture. Don't smile, frown,
look hard,
and all this sort of stuff. I mean, he was amazing, and we just ran this kind of grassroots campaign. It taught me how to raise small amounts of money. People would invite me to their home. I would come in, maybe 15, 20 people there. I'd give a talk, and then the host would ask folks for some money. I would never ask for it directly. So I'd get out of 20 people a total of $100, let's say. But I do 3 of those a day, and then other street campaigning. So, small amounts of money that way. And then we started asking people, what clubs are you in? Can you invite me to that club? What church do you go to? Will that pastor allow me to come in and say something? And that was a grassroots campaign that Larry put together.
Baltimore's future starts now was the slogan.
That's right. And he even had we had hangers that you put on the door. If I'd knock on the door, if nobody was there, I would leave the door hang. But in order to have it, you had to punch a hole in the this cardboard hanger that we had. So we had this collection of little holes that said vote September whatever. So he started handing them out. This little hole. And he kept saying, and he would say, "Little reminder of the election, little reminder of the election." So everything got recycled and used. And of course, we ended up with a campaign song. We did radio. We didn't do any television. We did radio. And Sean, there was an ad. You'd appreciate this, communications guy. Larry said that nobody knows who you are. He said, you may think they do. Nobody remembers football. Nobody remembers that you won a square off program. So we had to do something to get people to remember your name. So they did a 30-second ad of 2 guys walking out from Bethlehem Steel at the end of the shift. And the guy says to this other guy, "What are you doing?" He says, "Oh, I'm going to go to this rally for this guy, Kurt Schmoke." He said, "What? Kurt Schmoke?" And he says, "Who's that?" He said, "Oh, this guy's running for state's attorney." "What's that guy's name?" "Kurt Schmoke." And he says, "What's he done?" And so he gives me the resume, and at the end he says, "And he was a Rhodes Scholar." And the guy says, "That Schmoke is smart." That was the line.
That Schmoke is smart.
Schmoke is smart.
Come out smoking.
And it caught on.
Right.
So that was all of a sudden there's a name out there, and that's Professor Larry Gibson.
That Schmoke is smart. But he told me also that, and what you described in that that grassroots campaign, that initial campaign, he told me something that you probably still go by. By the yard, it's hard. By the inch, it's a cinch.
By the yard, life is hard. By the inch, life's a cinch. Yeah, that's from my grandmother. Yep. And so that, means sometimes instead of making big change quick, you just do the small things that will ultimately result in major improvements.
You beat him by a landslide. Beat him pretty good.
Didn't predict that one.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. But that just showed that it was people were ready for a change. I mean, the guy that I ran against, had a slogan about shoot first and ask questions later, and it was all lock 'em up, throw away the key. And we ran about being firm but fair, and people understood that they folks wanted a good, strong public safety agenda, but they wanted to make sure it was fair, and that's what we represented.
So then, after successful tenure as state's attorney, you made the decision to run for mayor.
Right.
At the time, Clarence Du Burns had taken over the seat from William Donald Schaefer, who had moved on. Talk about that process of just making the decision to take a shot.
Well, I really wanted to be the mayor, and it was. I told people that the issue I wanted to focus in on was to improve the quality of the education in the city, and I didn't realize that the guy who had been mayor was going to become governor, and then the African American leader of the city council automatically assumed the role as mayor. And there were some who were in the older generation that thought that I should wait my turn and not run against this incumbent African American mayor. And so what I did was, before he actually became the mayor, I mean, it was after the election of the Schaefer as governor, but before Mayor Burns was sworn in, I announced that I was running. So it was very clear from the beginning that people thought about him as an interim and not just as the permanent guy. It's so interesting. My respect for him grew as we campaigned together. I did not know him, Clarence Du Burns, well. I had this outsider's view of him as a machine politician.
Sure.
As somebody
East
that
Baltimore.
grew up in the East Baltimore machine.
And literally worked his way up from the bottom.
That's right.
Literally from the bottom.
And a guy that was more follower than leader. That was my outside view. As we campaigned around the city, I learned more about him, his background, his ideas for the city. At one point, at a debate, the person who was supposed to be the moderator of the debate didn't show up, and so the audience, it was a Northeast Baltimore Rotary Club, asked me to introduce him at the beginning of the debate.
Asked you to introduce Du Burns?
That's right, which I did. And there was one evening that is, I'll tell you about it. I don't know whether Jake will confirm, but a publisher of the Afro invited Burns and I to meet off the record for a long conversation, and I'd be projecting my own views of what Jake, Mr. Oliver, had in mind at the time, because he never said it to me exactly. But my sense was that he was getting, hearing from some of the senior black officials, some of the lawyers in town, some of the older ministers, is there a way of getting Schmoke out of the campaign to support Burns?
Wow.
Didn't say that to me directly, but that was my sense. He had just invited the two of us in a location that nobody would see the press. I mean, no press would see it, and just a conversation. And I must say, I came away from that meeting with Mayor Burns, again, more and more impressed with him as a public servant. But I was into it by then,
right.
Deeply into it, and committed, and had so many people involved and supportive, and great ideas and energy that we wanted to bring to the task. And so I left the meeting, and I told Mayor Burns, I said, sorry, we never had an opportunity to have this kind of meeting years ago. And I said, I appreciate all that you've done. I can't predict now who's going to win this election. I mean, he at the time, polls had me. It appeared that I was way ahead, but I knew, and Burns knew, that the polls showed that I wasn't polling more than 50%, which meant that it was still a close election. So even though the layman thought that I was way ahead, I knew, and he knew, that it was going to be a closer election. But so we left that meeting just with me saying, no, I'm staying in, and him saying that he was going to win.
And
yeah. So it was a difficult situation, and it did lead to some division within the African American community, and I would say more generational than geographic. More, it wasn't as you know, we had a long tradition of East Side West Side political rivalry, but this crossed over because the West Side, one of the West Side leaders of politics, which Mr. Adams, Willie Adams, he and Du Burns were extremely very good friends. And yet on the East Side, where my wife was from, we also had really strong support from the clergy and a number of elected officials who were no longer a part of Du Burns's political club. So we didn't end the traditional East Side West Side split didn't occur, but there were clearly generational differences with some older African American leaders saying, "Let Du have his time," and younger folks saying, "Time for a change."
Wow, that's I mean, the generational dynamic of that is fascinating.
Yeah.
Especially at that time, and I want to come back to that in a minute. But you mentioned your wife, and I think
now we're at the good part.
Yeah, that's a very prudent man. Well, yeah, this is the good part because how long have y'all been married?
We got married, and I don't know if you know, we actually eloped.
Oh, I didn't know that.
You didn't know that?
No, I didn't know that.
I'm assuming that you have all these.
No, I don't have all the answers.
I thought you were like a good lawyer.
I prepare, but
never ask a question you don't know the answer
to. I'm not that guy.
I'm
not that guy. I'll tell you a story offline about that, but I'm not that guy. I want to be surprised by stuff sometimes.
No, just real fast because I know we must be getting close, but Patricia is raised in the East Baltimore. Her family owned the Locke's Funeral Home, which was one of the oldest African American owned businesses in the state, really. But she grew up there on the East Side, went to Western High School, and then to Coppin State, what was State College, now University. And mutual friends just invited me out to the blind date. Met in July. I can tell you, we met in July of 1975. We got married in November of 1975.
That's quite an impact.
She was then home from medical school. She was at the University of Florida Medical School, and I was home from law school that summer. And it was just one of those, you know it when you see it.
July of 1975 you met.
And we eloped in November of 75.
You're a man of decisive man.
So we've been married since November of 75.
But you two have been able to be a quiet, powerful couple for all these years, and I guess.
Well, Sean, she's really just an amazing person. She finished medical school and decided she wanted to be an ophthalmologist, and she wanted an inner city practice. So she currently has offices, at the Mondawmin Shopping Center, and her practice was mostly Medicaid, Medicare people, older inner city clients. I mean, some private patients also, but a real commitment to medicine the way you'd like your doctor to be committed to. So, she's not the richest ophthalmologist in the world, but gave a lot to healthcare for the homeless. She would do work in the jail until our guys told her that she couldn't go there anymore. When I was in office, but she did a lot of public service, and she also is kind of a contrarian. They tell you in medical school, don't hire your family. It's always causing problems. Well, Patricia hired her mother, her sister, her brother, my children, but they work together quite well. But I just want to say that she's received a lot of accolades from Coppin and from the community for her service. Not a high-profile person. We decided that we weren't going to be that kind of a couple when I was in public service, and just let our service speak for itself, and that's it. And it's been the life of a politician, particularly at the local level, can be it has its strains, but we learn to deal with it over time.
I understand, and I know that we're gonna wind up soon, but I have to touch on some of your time as mayor when you inherited a city. I mean, you inherited a city that had been imploded by crack.
Yeah, it was there was a report that had been done just before the 1987 election that was done by the Goldsecker Foundation, said Baltimore 2000, a choice of futures. And there was a famous line in that study that it talked about the fact that people focused on the Schaefer years with the Inner Harbor and all that kind of stuff and kind of national acclaim. But the line in that report said, you must recognize that there's rot beneath the glitter. And so the challenge for me was to try to keep that glitter going, but also to address that rot that the report talked about. And basically what I confronted and what most people didn't realize was that half the state's welfare recipients lived in Baltimore. So that was a concentration of poverty unlike any other city in the United States. And that had its impact in housing, in education, obviously in crime. So those were some of the issues that we tried to address. And we made some successes, and many of those issues are still before us, real challenges. But I thought that the way in which we went about it and trying to have public-private partnerships to get not just government but the private sector involved in trying to solve some of those problems made a lot of sense.
From every mayor in my lifetime, from Schaefer to this current mayor, all of them before him, there's only been one that has not had a whiff of scandal.
Yeah.
Talk about how important that was to you. I mean, the typical conflicts of interest that were in city government. Nothing necessarily illegal, but you strayed away from any hint of.
Well, the issue, I mean, and Larry, Professor Gibson
Oh, you.
from time to time would say that he was allergic to jail, and so would make sure that we did things on the up and up. It from time to time people would approach you about cutting corners. And you had to be clear and be aware of it. And usually it wasn't something that was flagrant. Like I do recall once when I was state's attorney and the lawyer, I admired this guy's watch. He was a defense lawyer, and he wanted to give it to me. And immediately my antenna, went up because what's he want to give? What's he want in return?
Right.
But we had in the during my administration as mayor, a number of people who on the ethics board, on my staff. And I told you my assistant had been with me since 1983 when I was sworn in as state's attorney. So here it is now 2021, and she's still
and she was with you
my assistant
in academic Howard.
Every job that I've had since 1983, she's been with me, and simply a rock of integrity herself. And whenever there was even a hint of somebody trying to do something a little less than legal, her eyebrow would go up pretty fast, or the neck would roll, and the signal would be sent, beware. I think most important, and I was just very lucky that I didn't encounter that type of that type of situation.
But this is a rough town.
Yeah,
and with rough people, and they didn't call it Mob Town for nothing for a long time.
It was tough. I mean, and I got one incident where a staff member accused my public works director of doing something illegal. That got resolved. There was a housing inspector issue that came up, but nothing with respect, to me that was illegal, and I again very fortunate.
You referring to Deputy Director Frankie Babushi?
No, Babushi. That was
you had a run with.
That was early on. That this was a guy from the previous administration who worked in public works, and he thought he was running his own. Service department. He would go to council people and ask what they needed without checking with either the head of the Department of Public Works or with me. And he was running his own little government inside, and we never knew exactly what the quid pro quo was, and so I just had to let him go.
But with Babushi, you had a run-in with Mimi DiPietro behind him.
Correct. That councilman, this was one of his favorite guys, and there were, so many of our councilmen had been in a long time. They appointed people in government and thought, this is my guy. You can't deal with my guy. And that happened to be one of his guys, and I fired him. The councilman.
He was a colorful character. Had used some colorful language.
Yeah, he never quite
emphasis on color.
Me. Yeah.
But I'll leave. I'm not going to touch that.
He's gone now.
Yeah,
so,
he's gone. Yes, he is gone. Finally, we'll land this plane. As you look back, I want to come back just to get your sense of what if we had embraced your approach in 1988. I mean, we've had not just mass incarceration on the federal level. We've had zero tolerance policing on the local level that arrested 100,000 people a year, mostly black young men.
Yeah.
Many of them not charged, still with records.
Yeah.
I mean,
oh yeah, and we destabilized countries. I mean, we gave money to Colombia and the government of Peru to fight a war on drugs. The whole Central America gets destabilized because of the way in which we approach that. I think that had the national government stepped back and said that we're going to approach this as a health problem more than a crime problem, that we would have had actually safer communities. We would have had more people in treatment rather than in prison. So guys who had a problem would have had a health problem and not a record that continues to haunt them, prevents them from getting good employment, prevents them from getting stabilized families. I think that much of the whole domestic political life of our country would have been dramatically changed and improved had we viewed drugs at that time as a health problem needing intervention, public health intervention, and not as a crime problem needing incarceration.
And we wouldn't have been looking at 300 murders perennially in Baltimore City.
That's right. That's right. The war it had impacts in the streets and all the way up to the national level, and so I'm hoping that we have now seen a better approach, but I'm still troubled by the fact that substance abuse is still viewed differently in some communities than in others. I mean, the way in which the courts and the federal prosecutors seem to be handling the family that Purdue Pharmaceuticals that did all the pushed OxyContin and pushed all the opioids out there, and they're about to do this $1 billion settlement, but with a provision that nobody gets further prosecuted, nobody gets individually charged. I mean, Sean, if that had been you doing that, I don't think you'd come
different,
up,
a little
come
different
up with
treatment.
the same kind of settlement.
A little different
That's
treatment.
Right. That's right. And the other thing I just want to mention, I do believe that policing would have been different. The aggressive policing that came about because of the war on drugs has had a spillover impact, and that we've seen, of course, in recent cases.
Sure,
I don't think police would have been trained that way to react to people on the street that way had the signal gone out that we are trying to deal with, treat people rather than have them incarcerated. Police now carry EpiPens and stuff like that. Right. They try to treatment medicine and all kinds of stuff that they didn't have before. But you can imagine if they had been part of a public safety that included health considerations. If that's how they had been trained, maybe some of these tragedies that we've seen recently would not have occurred.
Right. Current president of the University of Baltimore, former mayor of Baltimore, former star quarterback for Baltimore City College, Kurt L. Schmoke. Thank you for doing this. I appreciate you.
No, it's been an honor to sit with you. Thank you very much, and I hope that things go well with your series and people learn a little bit more about their community and help to make it even better.
That's the job. That's the job. Thank you, Mayor.
Good
Appreciate
deal.
it. Thank you. Appreciate it.